This is B2B Marketing Methods. I'm your host, Terri Hoffman, and I'm the CEO of Marketing Refresh. Let's face it, embracing digital marketing is daunting. This podcast was created to make it more approachable. Join us as we talk to CEOs, sales leaders, and revenue growth experts who will share lessons learned and tips from their own journeys. Hello, and welcome to this week's edition of the B2B Marketing Methods podcast. I have a really special guest today. I'm going to tell you a little bit about her before I introduce her officially, but this person is very special to me because she helped me get started on my journey of starting Marketing Refresh, which is my marketing agency. She's the one that kind of gave me the push I needed to dive in and become an agency owner. And this person is named Raegan Hill. Raegan Hill is our guest today. I'm really excited for this interview and discussion. Raegan is a marketer turned recruiter, and she's going to tell you what that means and how that makes her such a rock star at what she does. But the things that I'm hoping we'll talk about today are mainly about resourcing. How do you go about resourcing and defining roles that you need in the marketing department for your business? How do you go about making sure that person is going to fit in your company culture, which is extremely important? And then I'm sure there are many more gems Raegan will drop on us throughout the conversation. But welcome, Raegan. Thank you for joining us today. It's a pleasure to have you here.
Thank you for having me.
Yeah. So I want to start by talking about your start. So you've worked for some pretty huge brands, definitely well-known brands in the Houston market and the Texas market, but also known nationwide. So maybe you can talk a little bit about how you got started in the field of marketing and some of the companies that you've worked for.
Absolutely. Well, so I got involved in marketing just as a wee little baby and when I was a whippersnapper in my 20s. But I actually was a self-taught programmer and worked for Halliburton and BMC Software as a developer before I got into marketing. And then I reached as far as I could go at the time working for BMC Software on the website. And I was asked if I wanted to move over into the marketing department. And that's how I got into marketing. I mean, I've been involved in marketing back in the day when it was flyers and trade shows. It's like they would ask you, what's the ROI on that? Oh, everything's good. It's all good. Yep, people showed up. And that was pretty much the extent of it, which marketing is very different today. Fast forward in my career back in 2004, after working for the NFL, I managed the volunteer program for the Super Bowl for the NFL. I used to say if I didn't throw up, it was a good day. Very stressful. I actually was hired by a staffing company as a recruiter. It was my first staffing job as a recruiter for a big, giant, publicly traded recruiting agency. And that's how I got involved in recruiting. Several years after that, I took what I call a leap of fear, total fear, no lie, a leap of fear in 2014 and decided to start my own recruiting agency for very specific reasons. One, I wanted to spend more time with people. Candidates are human beings. Yes, it's a product, but they're human beings. And I wanted to really devote more time. I wanted quality over quantity, but I also wanted to select the clients that I worked with because integrity was very important to me. And I wanted to make sure that I put people where I believed that they would be successful. So that's how I got started in owning my own recruiting agency. And then, of course, we all went through COVID in 2020. And I went from being a local, well-known recruiter for clients in Houston to suddenly I was having clients that were reaching out to me all over the United States because they were open to candidates who were working remote. And so now it's more the norm than it is the abnorm for me to have, say, a CMO role or a chief growth officer role or vice president of digital marketing role, 100% remote for a relatively nice sized company. So that's how I managed to get a US footprint from going from just a local footprint was through that 2020 drama that we've all had to go through. That was sort of the silver lining of it. And that's me.
Yeah. And so your career has definitely taken a lot of twists and turns, but I think that is a pretty good reflection of how people end up in marketing, right? That's a pretty consistent story that I think a lot of people go through. So talk to me about the candidate process and actually let me say one thing first. So I met Raegan because I was one of her candidates. So Raegan screened me and coached me and lined me up for interviews at a point in my career where I was going through a transition and a job change. And I kind of said at the very outset of the podcast that she's the one that gave me the push I needed to start a marketing refresh. So this really speaks to her integrity, and I do want to tell this story. So when I was working with Raegan, she had me lined up for what I thought was a great job role. I was very excited about it. I was going to prepare for the final interview, and she threw me a major curveball and said, "You know what, Terri? I think you're an entrepreneur, and I think you should start your own business."
Mhm.
And it just stopped me in my tracks, and I decided to sleep on it and give it some thought, and woke up the next day and said, "You're right. I don't want to go on this job interview. I'm going to give that a shot." And Raegan gave up the potential for, her fee getting landing that and kind of closing that deal for herself. And at that point, I just really learned who Raegan is as a person and how she operates with integrity, because she was not only operating in my best interest, but she was also looking out for her client's best interests, because the worst thing in the world that can happen to a recruiter is they place someone and then that person is unhappy in the role
Mhm.
and they have to refill it and the client is frustrated. So sorry for the long-winded story, everyone, but I think it just speaks so much to who Raegan is as a person and how she manages the candidate process. So thank you, Raegan.
It's a do the right thing mindset. I remember
Mm-hmm.
that. I remember that.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, I was sitting there in my head, I had the one side of my brain going, "Oh, she's so perfect for the job. She's so perfect for the job." And I'm sitting there talking to you and I'm like, she's going to own her own agency. You already knew it. You just needed someone to mirror it back to you. And I thought, I got to do the right thing. And that is how I have always done businesses, to do the right thing. And that doesn't always mean that the right thing is going to be monetarily to my benefit, but it's going to mean that from
Mm-hmm.
an integral standpoint, everybody wins. However the cards land.
Yeah. We have a lot of marketers who listen to this podcast. And so I want you to talk
Yeah.
about your candidate screening process and how you go about building, I'm going to call it a pipeline of candidates. And that sounds like such a impersonal
Yeah.
word to use, to put the word pipeline in there. But one thing that people should know is if you're in Houston and you're in marketing, you are definitely connected to Raegan. And she has way more people asking her to get placed in job roles than she could possibly manage. So, talk to us about how you manage that candidate pool and what you look for in those top candidates.
Sure. So, and the thing about when we think about a recruiter's pipeline, I mean, I've had clients who reach out and they'll say to me, "Hey, we've got this director of marketing position open. Do you have a pipeline of candidates before we sign a contract, do you have a pipeline of candidates that you think would be a fit?" And I kind of chuckle inside, and my internal answer is no, because I'm not submitting a resume. I'm submitting a human being, and I need to understand what it is that you, Mr. Client or Miss Client, you need in this director of marketing, not just in terms of skill, but in terms of personality fit. And I know it sounds cliche, but culture fit as well. So, I continuously keep a matrix, we'll call it a matrix of candidates that are passing through my applicant tracking system. An efficient recruiter what we do is we try to determine what we're going to anticipate in terms of the roles that our clients are going to need. And that a lot of that just often has to do with the uniqueness of each recruiting agency. So I tend to get reached out for a lot around those really specialized digital marketing roles. And so what I do is I try to keep sort of a roster of people that are ready to go, that are good professionals. Might be a conversion rate optimization specialist, it might be an SEO specialist, it might be a chief growth officer, say from the professional services industry. Industry is one of the most important criteria that I look for in terms of background. It's the number one deal breaker, in fact, that companies will ask for when they've hired me to fill a position within marketing. It'll almost always be, we need someone who's got B2B, B2C, all the other B2B's, or professional services, and then it'll be the industry relevant experience. These are the two most important criteria that recruiters are asked to focus on. And then, of course, it's skill. But one of the things that may separate me or make me a little bit unique from how other recruiters work with their clients is one, I've been a marketer. Do I know everything? Absolutely not. But because I've been a marketer and I love marketing, when I get a unique role that a client wants to have filled, the first thing I do is I research the role. Someone recently called me a method actor. Have you ever heard of that phrase? And I'm like, what do you mean I'm a
Oh my
method
gosh,
actor?
yeah.
But it made sense to me because what I do is once I get a position and I really absorb myself into the brand, I understand. I'd ask my client, I'm like, look, tell me the good, the bad, and hey, give me the ugly. We've got a contract. I signed an NDA. You can tell me what's the ugly because I need to find you
Hmm.
someone who can deal with the good, the bad. And if there's a little bit of ugly in the beginning, maybe it's a messed up technology that marketing's having to deal with, or maybe there's an aggressive stakeholder within another department that isn't always going to play nice in the sandbox. I need to know that so that when I find you the skill set, which isn't skill set's pretty easy to find, but I want to find you the person who's going to be able to interact and handle whatever that ugly is. So building a
Right.
pipeline of people, yes, we do it to the best of our ability based on what we are anticipating our clients need. But at the end of the day, when a client comes to me with a need, it's a completely brand new search, looking for a unique personality type in addition to the skill set. So I'm more of a hunter proactive recruiter, whereas a lot of recruiters tend to want to cast out a net, get a lot of applications and see what comes in, which is fine. I mean, there's some of that makes sense. I'd say 70 to 80% of my time is more spent understanding from the client what tell me what you really, really need, what you really, really need, what you no, I'm sorry. I got the song in my head now. No, but tell me let's talk through what you think you need. And then as a marketer, I can help them really decide, is that really what you need? And then once we
Right.
determine that, then I talk a lot about who their competitors are, who their peripheral competitors are, and then I go and I hunt and I start looking. And it may not necessarily be someone who's gainfully employed, and that'd
Hmm.
be a good thing to talk about is, a lot of candidates, a lot of people want to know, do you prefer Reagan someone who's working to place versus someone who's, I call it, in between successes? Would you be open to placing someone who's in between successes? And I'd love to answer that. But I'm like a method actor in the sense that I want to absorb everything there is about a company's brand and be that extension of their brand. And if I have somebody in my pipeline that I think could be a fit, then I'll have that conversation with them and pitch them to the client. But if I don't, that's where I go out and I do the hunt. That's when I really
Okay.
start going out there and looking for someone that's going to really be a good fit, not just on skill, but personality and culture. I know it sounds cliche, but it's so important.
Well, and it can sound cliche if I think someone's not actually delivering on it, but I know you like really put a lot of time and care and thought into that. I want to ask you about something you mentioned a minute ago, and that is clients really prioritizing industry
Yeah.
experience. What do you ever push back on that? Like if you feel you've found someone and they don't have that industry experience, what's your view on that?
Well, and that's something I talk about with my clients up front. I mean, there are cases where the industry relevant experience might make sense, but we chew on it. Let's put it like that. And what I always do with my clients, especially the ones who know me well, is I say, look, I'm going to present who you say you want. I'm going to present you 3 to 4 people, but I want you to be open to seeing the fifth one. And I'm going to call that my wild card. And the wild card is going to be somebody who may not come from the industry, specifically industry relevant background, but I feel like there's just a gut feel. It's the gut feeling, the recruiting gut feeling that I have. And my clients are always open to that. They're always like, okay, we trust you. Yes, we'll be open to seeing your wild card. And 25 to 30% of the time, the wild card gets the job. There are times where, like, I had a client last year it's professional services, B2B business advisory. Their
Hmm.
challenge when they said they wanted, and it was a chief growth officer position. So fair enough. That's a big role. That was a bit of a deal breaker because they needed someone who could hit the ground running and understand how to create revenue through marketing within the accounting and business advisory industry. And they were also doing a lot of mergers and acquisitions. The challenge with that was that there weren't really a lot of chief growth officers from the accounting space, right? Who were really
Yeah.
worth, who seemed to be in the know of how to create the kind of growth marketing that this firm was looking for. So the compromise was finding someone who had been working in the business advisory space, professional services at some point in their career, maybe not necessarily as an executive marketing leader, but having enough, in that case, another compromise was having someone who's been in a very highly matrixed organization, such as B2B SaaS. Could have been the legal industry, but there weren't that many marketers in that space that would have been a fit for it. But so, yes, there is a pushback. There's a conversation. We chew on it to make sure, because they're going to miss out a lot of times on some really great talent that may not have
Right.
industry relevant experience. And I'll give you a quick fun story. There was a candidate that I had one time. It was when I was placing somebody at this is several years ago, but oil and gas company, and they were adamant. We want a marketer, got to have oil and gas background, they got to understand upstream, downstream, whatever stream.
Well, that is a giant vocabulary you have to learn. So, yeah.
Yes, it is. It is.
Yeah.
So, I was presenting professionals that it came from oil and gas, but the challenge, at the time was not the ones that I was finding had the industry relevant experience, but were really a little bit light on some of the kind of marketing that they were wanting to think about at the time. So
Yeah.
here's an example of where I think around that, and it's I wound up placing a professional who's was a fourth generation. I call her fourth generation oil and gas baby, because her parents worked in oil and gas, her great grandparents worked in oil and gas, her I mean, just been around it her whole life, had never worked in it. She had actually worked on in marketing agencies, but she knew the lingo. Her family was involved in oil and gas. And so I said, hey, client,
Okay.
let me present you this person. And, they were open to it, and she got the job. So it's thinking through how, why does a company need industry relevant experience? And is there a unique way that we can arrange that when I submit somebody who maybe it's not exactly, hey, yeah, this person's been working in oil and gas, but hey, they've been around it their whole lives. Their parents were in it and their grandparents were in it, that kind of thing.
Yeah, but I think, what's interesting is you get very strategic. You get very
Hmm.
strategic with your candidates and your clients to make sure that you're sometimes surfacing things that they may not have considered are important, so that you're getting them to help you set how these different factors are prioritized, right?
Yeah.
That's something I think you do very well. And being that my company works with a lot of B2B industrial brands, and they have like really complex sales cycles, very complex product offering, multiple stakeholders involved. They're usually very focused on like talking to an agency or having that in-house director of marketing be
Hmm.
someone who knows their business already. And so that's you know, it's not unimportant. It is very important
Yeah.
to know and learn that business, but I don't think it always has to be as high of a priority as a lot of the other things that you may need to look for. It's so hard to find the right fit for any kind of
Hmm.
company when they're going through a hiring process, right?
Yeah.
So, yeah, I love that you get that strategic and you kind of challenge those thought processes and then ultimately help them guide you on like what their priorities are. That's huge.
Yeah, it needs to be a conversation, not a job order. And because I'm a boutique recruiting agency, and I want to stay that way, because I really enjoy giving as much time and energy as I is necessary to each one of my clients, so that we can make sure that we make them successful. And one of the funnest things I love doing is when I get a client who, let's say I place, maybe I place the leader there, and the leader turns around and says, hey, I have headcount. I need to start filling out the team. And so by then I know the company so well. And of course I know the leader, and I can help develop a team. So I'm not just presenting an SEO specialist and a marketing coordinator and a marketing strategist, but I'm really thinking about all the personalities that need to fit together in this
Mhm.
team that I'm building for that company. So working with companies where they need multiple people within the marketing department is one of the funnest things that I love doing, because I feel like I'm part of the company and I can help. It's like building the personality of the marketing department, right? Instead of,
Yeah.
you don't want a bunch of aggressive go-getter type A personalities all sitting in a meeting together, whether it be remote or in person. You need to have the thinker. You need to have the person who comes up with 10 ideas before anybody can spit one out. You need to have the one who pushes back. And so if you don't think about that as a recruiter when you're filling multiple roles for a company, you wind up just filling all of the same, exactly the same personality types. And that doesn't always work well for a
Yeah.
department at all.
Yeah. You're definitely thinking of the big picture for, yeah.
When I think about marketing, and you said, Raegan, you're strategic about it too. The two things that really come up that a lot of recruiters may not think about when they're placing people, and I've learned this the hard way, is that there's really two types of marketing departments. There's the type that tends to be more the resources department, where they're reacting to what the company needs.
Hmm.
So they'll have internal stakeholders who say we need XYZ, blah blah blah, and they're really more like an internal resource, and they're reacting and they're providing those types of things sort of on the fly with a little bit of strategy. And then there's more that aggressive revenue generating proactive marketing department that is telling the stakeholders in the other departments, hey, this is how we're going to get more revenue. This is how we're going to generate growth, and this is what we need you to be able to do within your team. They're more telling the company this is how we're going to do it, whereas you have other
Yeah.
marketing departments that are more, hey, we're reacting. Oh, you need us to take care of this. Okay. And that's fine. That's fine. They both have their purpose. One of the biggest things that I think I see recruiters go wrong, and I learned this the hard way years ago, is they put that proactive, strategic, aggressive, want to generate revenue marketer into a reactive sort of order taking marketing department, or vice versa, and it's a dismal failure, because the marketer, it's kind of like putting a saltwater fish in a freshwater pond, right? Even though they're both fish, they're not going to be able to survive because they're in the wrong environment. And so I think that's really
Yeah.
important for marketers to think about.
Yeah. Wow. That's so insightful. That's very insightful. What would you say to a client who's sort of at the other end of the spectrum, where maybe they're not trying to build out a robust marketing department? They're trying to make that first hire, and they might have a job description and a job order that they're coming to you with. How do you go about starting that conversation to fill that role? And I mean, I definitely have a purpose behind asking this question, because I think a lot of people who are just hiring that first marketing role or
Yeah,
trying to define what marketing should do, they're going with something that they think they need, but not necessarily what they actually need, right?
right.
Do you see that? Do you experience that? And how do you start that conversation?
I do, and it's so it's going to vary, but it's so yeah. Those are some of the most challenging roles. And one of the things I have to explain to clients is, if it's a new role, right? It's like, well, do we need a senior person, or do we need a more of an internal sort of coordinator, manager level? And the challenge in that case, as I talk to them, is understanding, if you bring somebody in at more the coordinator or manager level and they don't have a marketing leader to report, they're still in the tactical executional stage of their career path, where that's what they're really good at. They're not strategic. And so they're going to be
Hmm.
waiting for someone to give them strategic direction. And if it's the first person a company's hiring in marketing, that's not going to be successful, nor is that person going to probably be very happy, because they need the leadership and the mentoring as an executional tactical marketer. Same scenario if it's a company that has, let's say that they are using external agencies. I've had situations like this where companies have been very successful with a couple of different agencies, or even an agency of record on the outside, but then the frustration gets to where it's like, hey, there's nobody on the inside to catch everything that the agency's doing for us, and there needs to be somebody on the inside that's going to go chase after the internal stakeholders, make sure things are executed, react, get things back to the agency. And that person, we have to sit down and really define the level of strategic knowledge this person needs to have. And a lot of it has to do with on how mature a company's marketing already is. Because if you hire a
Right.
thoroughbred marketing leader, maybe you have the budget for it and you hire a thoroughbred, but you realize when they come in and they start putting together the strategy that a lot of what they're saying you need to do really can't happen for 6 months because there's so many things, other things that have to be figured out. You're probably going to lose that person. On the flip side, if you hire someone that's not quite strategic enough and they've got to hit the ground running more on some pretty aggressive strategy concepts, they might be in and over their head. I've actually had a client, two clients actually in the past where they had this problem. One had an external a couple of marketing agencies, one did not. What I wound up doing, I tried my best to help them figure out what they needed. I asked a lot of questions about budget and what their revenue goals were and what tool, but nonetheless, we still faced a bit of a challenge of trying to figure out what they really needed. So what I did is I just contracted them out a marketer who was in between successes, who basically helped them define what kind of marketer they needed. And then that marketer they worked with me to really develop that job description. I've had that happen
Interesting. That's pretty
twice.
creative.
Yeah, it was just like,
Yeah.
well, wait a minute, because one thing I don't want to ever do is I never want to start working on filling a position until the client and I are crystal clear on their absolute must-haves. Don't present unless you send me this. Because one thing that is different about me is I only submit 3 to 5 people. 5 people means that somebody got submitted and they were not a fit, and I need to understand why. But when I submit someone to a client, they should go to an interview. And if they don't, then I look at that as a failure on my part. I'm like, okay, I didn't hear something or I misunderstood something that you needed. So in other words, I'm not quota driven and I'm not sending out 15 resumes to a client and asking them to pick 3. I'm sending out
Yeah.
3 candidates and all 3 should go to interview and one of those 3 should get the offer. But if the client pushes back, I tell them, tell me if I was sleeping at the wheel or sleeping at the computer, tell me, because I don't want to ever invest time or waste time with a client submitting the wrong person just because we
Right.
misunderstood what they really needed. So, yeah. Does that make sense?
Yeah. Oh, absolutely. Yeah.
Clear as mud.
That could, well, I understand what you're saying. It probably feels clear as mud if it's the first time someone's going through that, but I can definitely appreciate the value of what you're describing, that whole situation. Another, I guess, hot topic that definitely emerged post COVID that I wanted to ask you about is virtual versus in person. If someone originally starts the conversation and says, "Hey, we need a person who lives in XYZ city. Here's what we're looking for." And wow, if they would open this up to being a virtual role, it would just open up that candidate pool. Talk to me about like how you push back or how you'd really dig into, does this truly need to be in person or could it be virtual? Because that's like really tough for a lot of companies if they're not used to a virtual work environment, right?
Right. Well, and so certainly the answer to that is yes, they would have a much bigger candidate pool if the position were virtual. What I'm, you know, what I want to be very careful of when I open up that conversation with a client and talk to them about taking the role remote is making sure that I don't convince them to do something that ultimately they don't want to do, because
Yeah.
then I'm going to be pulling a professional possibly from another job and placing them in an artificially remote role. It really never was remote, but the company got sold on the idea because it was a shiny toy. And Raegan said, "Hey, you'll get a better candidate." And then they hire the remote person, and they're not even set up really to make that person successful remote, because 98% of the company isn't remote. Then it's not going to be successful at all. So really, the remote, it's really dependent on whether or not the company has adopted the concept of remote. And if they haven't adopted the concept of remote, then they're not going to be structured to support that person. And I think that
Yeah.
that's going to be a fail. So for me,
Yeah.
I would say where I've had this conversation is more when I've had a client who has an on-site position. I actually had a manufacturing client year before last. It was a new role. It was the first marketing position within their internally manufacturing company, so they weren't real big on marketing internally. They had an agency of record, we'll call it that, or they had an agency, but that agency was struggling because they never could get a stakeholder on the phone to get content or do whatever. So
Mm-hmm.
we placed this marketing specialist there. But when I first got the position open, I said, hey, it was a marketing specialist role. So it was, a person at a certain stage of their career was likely going to be the one that I presented. I said, can it be hybrid? They said, absolutely not. Like they said, we don't even want someone who has the mindset that it has to be hybrid. Like we're never going to
Okay.
let it be hybrid, and and I asked 2 or 3 times just to be sure, because I would present a couple of people and say, I have someone really interesting, what they're interested in hybrid, and they wouldn't budge. There are other times, and we filled it, but it was hard. It was
Yeah.
hard to find someone. So it took me longer, but it's really more the positions that are, on-site versus hybrid. I see more people super interested in, like, hey, Raegan, I'll do hybrid. I love hybrid. That can be especially extroverted people, right? Us
Mm-hmm.
introverts, I'm an introvert. Believe it or not, I'm an introvert. We like remote. We're like, give me the remote job. I want to be behind a computer all day long. But the extroverts, they were like, hey, hybrid's great. But I'd say I never want to convince a company to consider going remote if the company isn't really set up for it, because it's just not going to be a successful placement to begin with.
Yeah, you want it to stick. It's like really insightful and helpful for people to understand. I'm gonna like move right on to another hot topic
Hmm.
that I think is I would imagine is a challenging part of your job, and that's budgeting for a role. Like, who wouldn't want to think that the budget can be lower than what it maybe should be to find the candidate that would really be the best fit? But I'm imagining that when you're talking to a client and also to a candidate, there's a lot of friction around the budgeting conversation for a particular role. So how do you go about helping each party figure out what the right fit is?
It doesn't feel like a friction conversation. In the beginning of my career as a recruiter, when I realized how much money I was going to charge people, and I'd have to get on the phone and make a cold call and go, yeah, this is how much I charge, I was like, what? I have to say that? That's a lot of money. But now that I've done this, 19 years I've been in recruiting, it's money conversations come so easy for me. In fact, I got to be careful when I'm out in my personal life and I'm hanging out with people and I meet someone new and I'm like, yeah, how are you? You look like you make about $110,000. It's because I can usually tell what somebody makes just by when they tell me what they do for a living. But all kidding
Hmm.
aside, you'd be surprised how many clients ask me to tell them what I think the salary should be for a particular role, with the exception being your really big corporations. They've got very structured, tiered criteria that determine the salary. But your mid to slightly large and even smaller companies, they'll ask me, they're like, Reagan, what do you think? What do you think we should pay for this person? And I don't say what's the budget. It's more like, if I don't know the answer, and there's no magic wand, like there's not, we can go to all these website and type stuff in and industry specific stuff and size of the company. It's still a ballpark, because at the end of the day, a company's budget is a company's budget. So if I
Hmm.
if I say to a company, hey, okay, you need a marketing manager, and you've got a team of 3 marketers internally that they're going to be managing as resources, but you need to implement an entirely new marketing tech stack, and they need to learn, like, there's a lot of these little nuances. It's like, you're looking at someone around 75 to 8, I'm just making up the number, 75 to 95,000. And they're like, okay, well, boy, 95 is going to really hit us hard. I'm like, okay, fair enough. And we start, the first thing I'll do is I'll say, okay, let's make sure that we're not, if 95 is too much, for example, then let's make sure that there's something in what we're talking about that we can take out maybe. But what I do there is I say, hey, look at this job description I put together. Is this ballpark what you think you need? And they're like, yeah. What I'll usually do is I'll go and have a couple of I call them touch interviews, where I'll talk with 2 or 3 people and I'll just say, hey, look, this is the range the client is comfortable with. where are you? And if I have two or three people in a row that are qualified for the role, and like, and they say to me like, man, I wouldn't even touch that for less than 110. Like, it's all about having an open dialogue. And that's one thing that I've always been, for whatever reasons, I've been very, professionals are comfortable talking to me about how much they make. I know in other
Mhm.
states, it's a faux pas to ask somebody what they make. But for me, I think of it more like a Jerry Maguire moment, right? Help me, help you. If you've never watched Jerry Maguire, you won't understand that joke. But it's more like I need to understand where a person's, what they think their market value is at. I need to understand what a client thinks they can pay for a role. And then
Mhm.
from my 19 years of experience, I can usually say, yeah, you know what? I think it's kind of like the Price is Right. Remember the Price is Right show? And
Oh,
you
yeah.
have to be in the
Yeah.
range, it's a higher, lower, lower, but it's kind of like that. And then my job is to really broker the win-win number. But a lot of times it's really me going out and asking professionals, like, hey, look, I got this client. This is the range we're thinking ish. And they'll be like, they're going to hang up on me, or they're going to say, no, but that's like 20K. And so it helps me to determine it. And here's the thing, what I don't ever do, Terri, is, yes, I want to make sure I understand the client's budget and the range, and I'm going to work with them to make sure that we're not undervaluing or overvaluing, right, the position. But what I don't do, Terri, is I never present a candidate to a client, and I tell the client this too. I never present them and say, "Hey, client, this candidate wants to make X." What I do instead is I say, "Hey, client, they're within your range, maybe a little bit on the high end, somewhere in the middle. They're going to be coming in at a softer number but they're within your range." I keep it open. And I tell the
Yeah.
professional that I'm doing this too, which I think makes them feel a little bit more safe and opening up to me about their compensation. And the reason I do this, because I've again learned this the hard way, is that the candidate now goes on a couple of interviews, and the candidate comes back to me and says, Raegan, I love the job, I love the people, but did you know that they're actually asking me to oversee business development, and they want me to implement they want me to implement an entirely new CRM, and they want me to scope it, and they want me to do this, and they want me, and I'm like, no, that never came up in my conversation with the client when I was working on the job description.
Yeah.
And so
Yeah.
because I didn't pigeonhole the candidate into a specific number, which is unfortunately I think what a lot of other recruiters might do, then
Mhm.
allows me to go back to the client and say, hey, client, I think we need to revisit the salary, because we don't want to do is we don't want to put someone in this role at a certain number, and then we realize they have so much more responsibility than what you're paying them for, and they leave. And so that's
Yeah.
where it gives us the negotiating flexibility. I had an agency that I'll give you another example, of
Okay.
how this, how do we figure out the budget, or how do we figure out what the compensation is going to be. It was a marketing agency here in Houston. She said she needed a director of digital marketing. I took it this was the leader. I wrote everything down that she said she wanted, everything in the kitchen sink. And I said, okay, great. And so job description, everything. And I just kept going, this is a VP. This is a VP role.
Mhm.
I mean, I could just, every time I chew on it and look at it, it's like, this is a VP. But she really was sold on wanting a director. So the way, in this case, it was about understanding her personality, and that she really needed to see what she thought she needed. And I told every
Mhm.
professional, I said, look, this is, so I presented her four people. I presented her three directors, and I said, this is a very tall, meaty role. I think it might be VP level. And these are people that were just coming up into director level. One was more of a mid-level director. Two were mid-level. So they weren't really ready to be VPs, but I told them it's a very meaty role. So I submitted that to her, and I said, oh, by the way, I said, listen, just trust me on this. I want you to meet this person. They're from another agency, but they're VP level, AKA they're going to be about 40K more in compensation. Like, I had to tell her that, right? They're not going to
Mhm.
come in at the director level. I said, but just please trust me. Just please see this person. Because in my heart, I just felt like the amount of responsibility that she wanted this person to take on, even though she kept saying, oh, we can't afford anyone. This is all we can afford. Long story short, she interviewed the VP and hired the VP, who wound up staying there for 3 years and has now moved on to like a big oil and gas company. But she found the money. She found the money. And what for me, it wasn't about, oh, hey, I presented a higher level person and they made more money, so I made more money. No, it was more about my concern that if she had hired a director, that director would have been set up for failure because they would have been in over their head. But if I hadn't taken that, if I hadn't just gone,
Yeah.
and just at least said, hey, just trust me and meet one VP. And I even told her, I said, if I'm wrong, I'll buy you a bottle of wine. I said, I'll buy you a bottle of wine if I'm wrong, because I wasted your time. I'll buy you a bottle of wine. She laughed, but she wound up hiring the VP.
I think that's what you really have a special skill for is I sometimes just having known you for so many years, I wish that you didn't have to call yourself a recruiter for people to understand what you do, because I think what you do is so much broader than recruiting. It is you describe yourself as like a consultative
Yeah.
recruiter, but it's bigger than that. I mean, you are wearing multiple hats throughout this process, and ultimately it's still the candidate's decision to make, right? And it's
Mhm.
still the client's decision to make. You're just providing the context and also trying to guide two people to the right connection. And but they have to make that final choice. So even if you're
Right.
putting something that they didn't necessarily ask for in front of them, you're
Hmm.
not you're not forcing them to make that choice. It's still
Hmm.
their final decision. But I like that you're, and always appreciate that you're able to think outside of the box. And I'll say this because we're coming to the end of our time for the interview. But gosh, Raegan, I am not, when I have guests on, my whole objective is to help our audience learn some things and maybe learn some best practices or challenges that other people have encountered that they can learn from. And I think you've offered a lot of that. But I'm also going to be super bold and say, if anyone listening to this does need a recruiter, you need to call Raegan because she is that good at what she does.
Thank you.
She's the top of the game in the country. And so I would really encourage anyone listening to this who's trying to resource or is a candidate who is looking for that next move they want to make. You will not have trouble finding Raegan Hill on LinkedIn, except that you have to know how to spell her name correctly.
Yeah,
So
the
yeah.
RAE.
Yes. Yeah.
I actually bought the domain name. So my domain name for my website is reaganhillgroup.com, and it's RAEGAN. Thanks, Mom. But I actually bought the domain name REAGAN because the brain just wants to spell it differently.
I
Um,
didn't know that. That's smart.
yeah,
Smart
yeah.
move. Yeah.
But no, I would love to be a resource to anybody, Terry, that especially that, knows you. I love people. Marketing is my obsession. People are my passion. And, I think if a company's, especially if it's a company that, it could be a replacement position, it could be a new position, but if they're looking for someone who is more of an integrity first recruiter, who money is not green enough for me to do something that would cause somebody to either fail or not be successful. I've had clients where I've told them, look, I can't fill this role and here's why. Like, I'm honest about that because it's
Hmm.
integrity first for me, not just with my conversations with clients, but with professionals. And at the end of the day, so many of the professionals that I've represented, Terry, have become clients. And, then they move up in their career. And then lo and behold, one day that they're ready to make another move and they become candidates and then they become clients again. So, for me, it's the long game relationship that is critical to me. And it's important to me that I live out my values, which is authenticity, integrity, just honest with people. I had a candidate one time. I think he wrote me a LinkedIn recommendation. It's somewhere on LinkedIn. I had to give him some bad news. I had to tell him the truth. Why he wasn't going to. I said, look, I can't place you. He kept reaching out and reaching out and reaching out. And I just flat out just said, I can't place you. And here's why. And I explained to him because he was a creative who wanted to be a marketer. And I just flat out said, I don't have clients who look for someone like you. And here is the challenge you're going to face. And here's why you're not going to probably be successful in landing something. I just was very just direct and honest with them. And
Hmm.
and he actually wrote me a LinkedIn recommendation and called me a year later. And he wound up, I think he wound up starting his own thing. But he said, Raegan, if there's ever any bad news that I needed to get, I'd like it to be from you because you just have this way of saying things where you don't even feel bad. And he said, but you were honest with me. but it was, you were honest and you were direct, but you were, you said it in a way, he said, where I knew you were saying it in my best interest, not, not because you were trying to be rude. I just didn't want him to spin his wheels reaching out to all the other recruiters, knowing that he'd not get any calls back. And I wanted him to understand why, and that's the kind of attitude that I have with my clients, the
Hmm.
companies that hire me, as well as the professionals that want to be represented through me. So
Yes,
anyway,
I have seen it. I've seen you do that time and time again. And that's just one of the other things that I value about you as a person
thank
and
you.
as a professional. So,
Thank you.
guys, we're going to be posting in the show notes. We'll have a link to Raegan's LinkedIn profile and also to her website so that you can connect with her there. How do you prefer people get in touch with you if they want to connect, Raegan?
Well, definitely if it's a company that needs a position filled urgently, I mean, I would say any way you want. Telepathy is fine with me. My phone number, I'll give you my address, like whatever it takes. You just reach out to me. But I'd say, I have a phone number obviously that we can provide after this call, but it would
Okay.
be anybody can email me on LinkedIn. So I have an account that anybody can email me. There's a contact page on reaganhillgroup.com. The number that we can provide after this call is a voice over IP, and it receives text. So
Okay.
especially if it's a client, if it's a professional, I do appreciate if a professional goes to reaganhillgroup.com, and if it's not easy to find, please tell me. But just click, it should be a register link, and it's like literally a 3-minute application. It's super. Just dump your resume into my ATS and then follow up with me on LinkedIn. Because if you just reach out on LinkedIn with your resume, that means I have to spend 7 or 8 minutes downloading the resume, uploading it into the ATS, creating your record.
Okay.
So save my fingers some typing and do it for me. Only takes about 3 minutes.
Okay, that's awesome. I mean, and if you're going to place someone, they at least need to be able to follow some basic requests, right? So,
And I try to get back with
awesome
everyone,
info.
but it's not always
Yeah.
easy. I feel,
Yeah.
listen, it happens. There are people that have reached out to me on LinkedIn, and it's like, as a recruiter, candidates they're frustrated because they're not getting callbacks. Get it?
Yeah.
And it's frustrating for me as a recruiter because there are times where I have to make a judgment call on, am I going to return these 10 emails today of people that have reached out, or am I going to get 3 people to my client who desperately needs this position filled by tomorrow? Like, where do I place my time? So sometimes I have to make some hard choices in that regard, but I do my very best to get back with people. It just sometimes is a little bit delayed.
Totally understandable. Well, I had a couple of rapid fire questions that I
Ooh,
want to ask you. And so it's hilarious because Reagan and I had a funny conversation about this earlier in the week. So she might not want me to ask her all these, but I'm going to, and we'll see what she says. We'll just see how
okay.
this little fun unravels. What if there is a musical artist or group that you could see in concert, dead or alive? Who would you want to see?
Queen,
Oh, yes.
Freddie Mercury. I almost said Freddie Krueger.
Okay, I'm going to go with you. Let's get
Queen,
tickets.
totally Queen, 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 Queen. I was, just Freddie Mercury, especially Radio Gaga. Radio Gaga.
Oh
Remember that
yeah,
one
good
live?
stuff. I love Queen. Yeah, I'm a huge
Oh
fan.
yeah, no doubt.
Um, what is a book that you find yourself constantly recommending?
The Bible. No
Yes.
lie. Okay, look, no lie. Seriously. I mean, I have so many books, it would make your head spin. And there are times when I buy books and I don't even get a chance to read them. Like, I think, what do I have? There's a question that I have on my, when somebody schedules time with me, the question is, what's the latest book you've read? And I have like probably 1,000 where they're all different. But I think my latest one, I haven't had a chance to read it, is called The Happiness Advantage. I don't even know, it's by Sean, but for me, honestly, true story, I decided last December that it was on my bucket list to read the Bible. Like I said, I was going to do it, and I put it on my bucket list. So darn it, I'm going to do it. And so I've been reading with a life application Bible, which is this thick, and it's quite interesting. I mean, it's like reading a New York Times best-selling novel if you buy one that you can understand. That
Yeah.
it would be that one. Yeah, it would be the Bible. But that's just me. Listen, look, I'm not too far from the way my mother's personality was. She read the dictionary for fun. Like, that was my mother. She read the dictionary for fun. So I'm like, I get it. I get a little bit of that from her. So I like anything that's intellectual. I'm not a I read more things that are going to make me grow. And it could be
Yeah.
anything from like some sort of string theory topic to near death experiences to I think I have a marketing for dummies.
You are
I actually know the author. She's a chief marketing officer. I just talked to her yesterday. I have this book. I mean, it's really all over the place. I just love to learn.
no. I can attest to that though. When you want to learn about something, you do not go little. You go
Mm-mm.
big. What This is my last question. What is the best job you've ever had?
What is the best job I've ever had? Well, that I got
Hmm.
paid for, because I was going to say being a mom.
I've had another guest who said being a dad was his favorite job he's ever had. So
Yeah.
being a mom can definitely be your answer.
Being a mom. No, the best job I've ever had. So you didn't ask me the most stressful. The best job I've ever had is the one I'm doing now,
Hmm.
hands down, because it has allowed me to not only stay involved in marketing, because remember, I was a marketer and then I became a recruiter. So I, don't get to play in the marketing space anymore like the marketer, but I get to be around it with all the marketers. I learned so many things. I learned so many things. I'm self-employed, so I can work from home. So my introverted, nerdy side can cocoon behind my big three monitors. It would definitely be what I do now. Yeah.
Well, that's awesome. And I'm not surprised by that answer because it just emanates from you that you love what you do.
Thank you.
Which makes it very fun to work with you. So
Thank you.
I thanks again for agreeing to spend some time with us today. And folks, like she mentioned a few times, she's an introvert. You would never have guessed it because she's so
INFP.
outgoing and so talkative. But I know I had to arm wrestle her into doing this. And Raegan, thank you because I
Thank you.
think you have so many insightful things to share with the
Thank
people who
you.
listen to this show. And I once again just thank you so much for spending some time with me this afternoon. It's
It
always
went
fun to talk to you.
fast. It was a pleasure, Terry. Thank you
It,
for the offer. Thank you so much.
you're welcome. Thanks for listening. Please be sure to follow us on your favorite podcast channel and leave us a review. We'd love to hear from you. You can connect with me on LinkedIn or visit our website at marketingrefresh.com.